My name's Louise Mansfield. I'm a Professor in Sport Health and Social Science at Brunel University London. And I work in the Culture, Sport and Wellbeing Evidence team, where I co-lead the stakeholder work, which is what I'm going to talk about today, with my lovely colleague, Professor Norma Dakin, who has been was at Winchester within this program, but now is at the University of Tampere in Finland. She's going to talk in this presentation about some of the culture and arts aspects of our stakeholder work, and I'm going to talk about the sports aspects of what we've done. We're going to focus on the challenges and successes of the stakeholder work. What you've heard today in terms of the challenges and successes around evidence reviews and the evidence out there are the ones that we have experienced as well. But everyone has also talked about the centrality of the partnership stakeholder work that has underpinned their programs right from the start. And so I think it's right and proper to really explore that in terms of what works and what we have faced whilst we are doing those things. I think the strength of our program is really built on the stakeholder partnership work. We drew from a model that NICE used actually around the range and scope of stakeholders that we wanted to engage: policymakers, commissioners and managers, scholars and fellows, so those working in academia, but also those experts not working in academia, professional practitioners, the other What Works Centre programmes, and the public citizens groups. That's quite a range of stakeholders. Each one of those is equally important to the whole development of the evidence programme, to the evidence reviews, to the translation, dissemination and the mobilisation of that evidence, and those are the things that we're going to speak to. There's lots of theories about stakeholder engagement. It's really complex methodologically and practically. Do you just put all the stakeholders in a room and expect things to happen? Or is it more of a case that we're working to a co-production, co-learning type of approach? And for me, I wrote about this a couple of years ago in terms of research policy practice relationships for sport and public health. There are what I call these 3 R's. They're not easy, they're processes that you have to work through, but it demands a particular approach to reciprocity, to reflexivity, not that kind of daily navel-gazing stuff, but a kind of ethical commitment to a structured reflexivity about what's working and what's not working, and to stop doing what's not working when you know it's not working. And that's sometimes something that we forget. And the issue of resourcefulness, and that's not just about financial resources, although I'll pick that up in the challenges. It's about the human resources that all stakeholders can and cannot give to a project, and recognising that is really, really crucial. It's a process for us, the stakeholder projects. I was asked once, how do you select your stakeholders? It's not quite like that. Like all the programs, we have activated long-term networks of partnerships with people and engendered new ones as we've gone along. It's not exclusive, it's an inclusive approach, and we try to work through that process to get this shared understanding, to make relevant and transparent and effective the decisions that we make. I'm not going to romanticize this and say that there's always consensus. There isn't. It's working through the disagreements actually that probably is the key part of what we do. So what are our key successes? I think, and Christina highlighted this right at the beginning, and people have talked about this collaborative development phase. Actually, this was a real privilege of this project, to have an identified 6 months at the start where we could talk to people about what we were going to do and what their priorities were. And we started here at Brunel with a workshop, 2 days, with that range of stakeholders I've just talked about, asking 2 key questions. How are you defining, conceptualizing and evaluating wellbeing in the work that you do, and what are your priorities around the wellbeing agenda? We didn't just bring people here to Brunel. I went out to see stakeholders at work doing things I'd never done before, whether that was to do with music and singing or mosaics and arts. I was involved in all of those just to see a demonstration of how stakeholders operate in practice with people. Really valuable to the workshops and the defining of the actual research questions, which Norma's going to talk about. I did make a mosaic. It wasn't very good. I did do it, and I got a lot of pleasure out of doing it. And much more reflective of my experience, the involvement in sport and physical activity were observations that we went and did. That work really then developed, we transcribed all of that data from the workshops. We also did have 21 interviews with stakeholders and the observation notes. fed into the Delphi process that Nancy talked about earlier, and Norma's going to talk a little bit more about that.
So this is quite a formal process of consensus development that we did as part of our stakeholder work, which we published in the Journal for the Royal Society of Public Health. So I don't know if you've done nominal groups or Delphi processes, but it's the closest in academia that we get to the Eurovision Song Contest. It's quite exciting. We do actually get to rank different priorities and vote for them. And we did this in a 2-stage survey, so we ended up with these different topic areas. And we had some sort of real areas of consensus that were very interesting in the sport and culture and sport sector. So there was consensus around the fact that we need evidence, that practice should be based on evidence, and that we need better evidence. There were also some real nuances. So some of the nuances were around how we define well-being, and there seem to be particularities in culture and sport which aren't necessarily completely reflected in the ONS4 definition. So things like confidence and self-esteem and personal development and aesthetic values coming in. And then we also had areas of, not disagreement, but difficulty, things that still needed to be worked out. So one of those was how we regard quality in evidence. We noticed that there were differences in perspectives between service delivery organisations on the one hand and policymakers and scholars on the other, in views about evidence quality, in about the hierarchies of evidence, which we're going to talk a bit more about in our workshop, and the role of grey literature and qualitative research. So that meant that in our evidence review process we tried to reflect that and draw on a very broad range of evidence sources, including grey literature, which is why we ended up with such a kind of extensive range of outputs from our programme. But we also use the Delphi process to help us identify the review topics and the scope and the parameters of those reviews.
Great. And I think that core business of developing the priority areas for review was a real essential success for us. That doesn't mean that we've answered everybody's questions in the way that they want to be answered, but we do think we've captured the right range of topics. And remember, we're a programme that really deals with two really large, diverse sectors, both culture and sport. And it's given us also a way of thinking about future directions. So the second key success for us is, and people have talked about this today, is how we move from evidence to impact. Again, the challenges of collecting the evidence have already been talked about. But I think one of the key successes has been our partnership with the What Works Centre for Wellbeing, particularly in the translation of our technical reports. We've produced more than 24 outputs, including the technical reports, the secondary analysis reports, but these briefing papers that give a quick summary and look really great is something we could never have done as an academic team. We wouldn't have had the resources, both in terms of time and finances and skills, in order to do it. And that has been a real success in the partnership that we've had. There are ones for every one of the systematic review technical reports we've had. Sometimes things happen just fortuitously. And at the same time as we were involved in this wellbeing agenda that we thought was really important, government was thinking it was important, and there was a parliamentary inquiry into the social impact of participation in culture and sport during the lifetime of this 3-year project. The evidence that we had, we could easily and quickly, I think it's the quickest that we've ever been in terms of responding to one of these things, respond to this. And that, like other organisations in this room, I think has been key in terms of the evidence for that particular inquiry. That's one of the secondary analysis reports. And also through the partnerships, what we were able to do is identify key case studies in delivery in the sectors, both in culture and sport, that we could write up in a 2-page form. They're kind of printable PDFs. But these were a way to showcase what was going on. We knew we were talking to the right people, but in terms of the promotion and visibility of their work, we were able to produce these case studies, which you can find on the website, which also are able to be used and usable by other people in the sector. There's also the blogs. We had a blog associated with everything that we did. And of course, I'm a convert now to Twitter, and I can see the kind of energy that's gone into it. And we found that really, really valuable in what we do. So the second success is turning evidence into impact, and that comes through our partnership work, and particularly in relation to working with the What Works Centre for Wellbeing. We also, we go to conferences as academics, our Vice Chancellor, Professor Buckingham, talked about talking to other academics and people who are in your field. What we made a conscious effort to do was look at the events that our stakeholders were running and go to those. You get a different audience. You're talking to a whole different scope and range of people. This is just one example. At the time, we were looking at the Sport and Dance and Young People Review. UK Active were running a whole series of seminars, workshops, regional ones across the country. And we were able to deliver through that. I was in Bristol and Manchester and London, and I think somewhere else. But that has been really valuable. Stakeholders, we know, are doing events that can allow this evidence to be really visible, and that's been a real success in what we've done. I think the third success is in relation to future directions. So as we've been working with stakeholders and learning what their needs are and what their understandings of well-being are, we've been able in many ways to support the work that they're doing. This report is just out. I know Paul Jarvis is tweeting about it. Paul Jarvis is Head of Health with Street Games, and we've worked over the past year alongside the work we've been doing on the What Works Centre for Wellbeing to support them in evaluating the contribution of their doorstep sport programme to the mental health and wellbeing of young people living in disadvantaged communities. And so the synergies between the partners and the way that we are reviewing evidence but also supporting evidence building has been really central to the work that we're doing, and we would call that a success. And here, the kind of findings we're seeing also link into some of the promising findings around the mechanisms in the evidence, although, like Anne-Marie said, those are also quite limited. But focusing on tailored provision, workforce training around mental health. We've also found that in a Sport England project, the Health and Sport Engagement project, that the community sport workforce is what I would call an asset in the delivery of mental health and wellbeing services or support mechanisms. Partnerships for delivery and this issue that we know stakeholders are really, really tuned into that we can support in terms of building high quality, credible research and evaluation strategies with them. Norma's going to talk about the culture example.
Yeah, so we have some a lot of different collaborations with people in the culture sector and arts as well. So the workshop that we're going to be doing shortly after this with Jane Willis is around our creative and credible work. And that's an evaluation programme that looks at different evaluation methodologies for arts, health and wellbeing, which is an ongoing programme that we've been able to feed into through this research. But also there's a couple of other examples, so one of which is the all-party parliamentary group for arts, health and wellbeing, which I was an advisor to, a 2-year inquiry that they did, and we were able to cross-fertilise from the different research programmes. And I also authored for Public Health England a standard evaluation framework for arts, health and wellbeing, and you can find that on the PHE website. But what that does, it provides you with a reporting framework, because one of the things that we've learned, especially through our grey literature reviews, that quite often programmes and projects aren't very well described. And so the basic resources and the processes that are needed in order to secure successful outcomes aren't necessarily well described or well mapped. So the PHE framework, the starting point is a reporting framework to describe different cultural activities, different cultural interventions. And we use that both in the APPG as a kind of tool to collect evidence, but also in this project we used it to inform our grey literature review, so we used it as a data extraction tool basically. So there was a kind of developing tools for practice and for evaluation of grey literature, and evaluation of practice as opposed to research is really an important kind of spin-off to the work that we've been doing. Great.
I'm going to just briefly wrap up with some of the key challenges, because I've made it sound like it's all fantastic and nothing was a challenge. But there are every day with these types of work a number of challenges. And when you read the research literature around evidence-led policy, these are sort of badged as failings of researchers to understand policymakers, failings of policymakers to get involved in research projects, etc., etc. And I think that actually, challenges is a better word. These are things that are not failings that we cannot get around. They're negotiable things, but they are things that need to be identified and worked through in order to achieve the successes that you want to achieve. And there are 3 key ones here. I think one of the fascinating eye-openers into the way that government works is about time and timing. Things happen really quick. And we are asked for evidence in 24 hours, and we've only just started our evidence review. I think it's just a matter of fact of the differences in the time with which we do our work in academic policy and practice. And we need to recognise that and think about and plan perhaps a kind of staged approach to evidence and be in response mode when those things happen. I think we've probably managed to work through that. I know as academics, we like to take a long time and, you know, our life's work is there in producing the findings. But clearly policy moves really, really quickly. Practice is dependent on funding and often that's short term. And so we really do need to recognise, all of us as a stakeholder group, what those challenges of time and timing are. Expectations and resources are never going to go away, no matter how much you talk about what your expectations and resources are. You can see on the website the number of outputs that have come out of this project, more than 24 for us, the same amount for the other programs. And they are fantastic outputs. They take a huge effort from a collaborative team. And I think building that into your funding models is really important, not just the money, but the time and the expertise to do it. I said we wouldn't have been able to produce them without the What Works Centre. There are also, I think, things to develop an answer around academic convention and authorship. Anyone who's in the academic world will be coming into the research excellence framework, and so proper recognition for the work is going to be key. And sometimes that doesn't match with the way that things are promoted and made visible. That's something else to work through. And I think for us, the challenge of capacity and capacity building, making sure you've got the right people in your teams, from small-scale delivery organisations through to big academic institutions, and developing pathways for building wellbeing science, both in communities, in policy teams, in practice teams, and in academic teams, is really, really important. Because there's an old version of these slides up, I'm not sure we've got a conclusion. No. So I am going to talk to this very quickly. We did speak about whether we needed a conclusion, and wasn't that conclusion enough? But the conclusion to this for us is about the strength of the partnership work in the stakeholder groups and ensuring that the range of stakeholders that need to be in the group are there, and being reflexive about how that can change over time. We've heard the importance of building the evidence and the challenges of doing that. That's still really critical. Having rigorous, high-quality, credible evidence is really, really important for all of us. And I think with the challenges, it's about recognising they're there. These for us have been things we've had to discuss and recognise and talk about. There's never one final answer. You can't keep all of the people happy all of the time, but you can try and work through these things for a successful production of evidence and turn that evidence into impact as you go along. And that's it. Thank you.